everybody, welcome to QWR Nature News. Today we're in a really special place, the Dell Boardwalk, and it is closed to the public right now because it would be hard for people to walk through our boardwalk and be socially distant. But today we're going to show you all the cool things at the Dell Boardwalk on this virtual visit. So welcome, and we're at the beginning of our boardwalk right now. Just a little history about the boardwalk. It was originally built in 1983 to 84 from funds from the Return a Gift to Wildlife grant. And after the years, it kind of was dilapidated. From 2011 to 2018, it was actually closed to the public due to severe dilapidation. But we were really lucky. We got a grant from the Gardner Foundation, and it was rebuilt by Anthony Bonner of Sea Level Construction. So ever since then, it has been open, and it was open to the public the same hours as the Refuge is, from sunrise to sunset. Now, of course, it is closed, but we wanted to show you guys where we're going to go today. So we are actually on the south side of the Refuge. This is the Nature Center. So if you, in the future, want to visit the Dell Boardwalk, you just go across the street and across the railroad tracks. You'll see black gates. And that's where we're going to walk today. So we are going to go down our boardwalk. It's a quarter-mile boardwalk. And we're going to go to the terminal platform on Quantic Creek. And the refuge ponds actually run into Quantic Creek. So we're going to show you guys a little bit of that. And we're going to point out some flora and fauna along the way and talk about the history of the Dell Boardwalk. So it gets its name Dell. It's kind of an interesting name. The fairy part comes from it being a magical place that people would visit in the early 1900s. And it looked very different. It was called Dell. The word Dell means a bowered over, almost like a magical tunnel. So Dell means that there were lots of trees that came over the creek, and it made it look like a tunnel. Now it looks very different, and we'll talk about why in the future, but we still think it's a really magical place to visit. So let's go on our walk. Okay, so the first plant that we're gonna take a look at is cinnamon fern. And ferns are a vascular plant. Right now, they haven't unfurled yet, so we're just seeing the fiddlehead, it's called. But they're really cool plants that grow in swampy areas and moist areas. Ferns are actually 360 million years old. They are not a flowering plant, and they produce other ferns through spores that you might notice on the underside of their fronds in the fall, and you'll see those little dots. Those are actually the spores. So cinnamon fern is named after its cinnamon brown color, and if you come back to Dell or even parts of the main trail, you'll see lots of ferns along the way.
All right, and the next plant that we want to point out is this one that you see growing right next to our ferns. This plant is called Skunk Cabbage, and we did talk a little bit about skunk cabbage during our nature walk. Skunk cabbage is actually one of the first plants to emerge in the wintertime. It can actually emerge as early as January. And the reason why it can come up so early in the year is because during the wintertime, skunk cabbage actually stores starch in its rhizomes, or its root structures. And when it uses the energy from the starch, it burns that energy and creates its own heat. So it can actually melt the snow all around it. And this plant is actually named for its skunky smell, which is why it's called the skunk cabbage. But surprisingly, it is a favorite food of goslings, which are baby geese. So some other animals will eat this plant, but primarily lots of geese. I see some questions. As we walk to our next plant, I can answer some of these questions. The hiking trails on the refuge are open. The boardwalk, this Dell Boardwalk, is not, however, because it is such a narrow path, it is very difficult for people to properly social distance on this path. So unfortunately, this part of our trail is not open. But all of the other sections of our trail across the way, across the railroad tracks, are open still. And this is not the place where birds fly up to you. That is Morton's Wildlife Refuge. Our birds will not land in your hands. That's a good question, though.
All right, so this next plant or tree is the tupelo tree, and they're a really amazing native tree, and you can identify them by this really tough bark. It's called alligator bark. And at the tops of the trees, even though they're not budding right now, they have these 90-degree branches that stick straight out from the tree. That's a really good way to tell that it's a tupelo. When they grow their leaves, they are actually one of the earliest trees to turn to beautiful fall colors, yellow, orange, and red. So if you come back in late August, these trees will already be turning different colors. They're beautiful. But before then, when they flower, they're really important for native birds and bees. So I don't know if anyone has ever heard of like tupelo honey. Some bees make tupelo honey. They're also important when their branches fall off the tree and it can create a cavity in a tupelo tree. That's important for small mammals like possums and raccoons. So it's an awesome tree. We have throughout the Dell Boardwalk. They do like swampy areas, so freshwater wetlands as well as tidal wetlands like we're here at the Dell Boardwalk. So we're actually going to go to our main platform. We're going to go to the first one today.
Sorry about that, everybody. All right, and we're going to talk about some more of these plants that you see along the side. We're just going to stop right up here in just a moment, but we want to just kind of give you a nice, beautiful view. Today is a perfect day to be doing our Fairy Dell walk. Yeah, thank you. It does look beautiful since it's been restored. And Cara mentioned this in the beginning. I don't think we had that many viewers in the beginning, but our restoration was funded by a wonderful grant from the Gardner Foundation and built by one of our board members, actually, Anthony Bonner of Sea Level Construction. You can hear some of our planes overhead. So we want to talk a little bit about this plant right here. So this is an eastern red cedar plant, and it's given that name because it has this beautiful kind of reddish bark, very papery bark, easy to peel bark, but it has a very beautiful hardwood red core. It has these scale-like needles, and eastern red cedar is actually the most common conifer in the eastern part of the United States. So conifer meaning it has cones, kind of like our pitch pine and our white pine. And eastern red cedar also grows a red berry that is a favorite of cedar waxwings, which are a beautiful bird if you've ever seen them. They look like their wings have been dipped in red paint. And then the browse or the twigs of this plant are eaten by lots of deer. So this plant is important for lots of wildlife. It's also a plant, sometimes birds will strip some of the bark from these plants to use in their nests. Sometimes they will build their nests within them too. And some of them can be very dense, so that's a good space to build a nice hidden nest. All right.
Right, so now you might be able to start seeing our osprey nest that's right on a platform in the middle of the Phragmites. And when we were here earlier, just checking out our boardwalk to see where is the best places to talk about, we did spot an osprey in the nest. So you might be able to see Mom in the nest. She's sitting on the eggs right now. But osprey are an amazing bird that come back to Long Island in the spring and summertime.
Sorry, I'm trying to get it to steady for you guys. There you go.
They're actually coming all the way from South America and Central America and Costa Rica and all of those beautiful warm countries. I'll move over here. And, so osprey are amazing birds of prey that hunt fish, and we'll see them often on the creek, but also on our freshwater pond. And I don't know if you can see, but there is, maybe that's Dad sitting on a
I don't think we can see from here on the camera, but maybe as we get closer.
Yeah, so
it's right by that little water tower.
And they'll actually come back to the same nests over and over again. They will even build up their nests so that they can be 10 feet deep. Obviously this nest is not that deep, but it's deep enough that you don't really see the female osprey brooding her eggs or sitting on her eggs. So we have seen them hatch successfully. Last year I think they hatched 2 nestlings, which was awesome, and born here at the Refuge. Osprey didn't used to be such a common sight on Long Island. Unfortunately, after the chemical DDT was sprayed in wetlands to eliminate mosquitoes, but since that chemical was banned, they have made an awesome comeback. So that's really great to see. We see different birds of prey at the Refuge: osprey, eagles. There's some ducks flying overhead. Sorry, I get distracted. But we'll continue on our walk.
So the plants that you see all along this walk, the majority of the plants, are these reeds. And if you tuned into our last nature news, you might remember what those reeds are called. They are called Phragmites. And Phragmites are found in many, many places on Long Island. Phragmites are a common reed. There are 3 species of Phragmites in the United States, 2 that are found in New York State and Long Island. One of them is native, however. Most of the common reed, or most of the Phragmites that you see, is actually the invasive kind. So when during this time of year, our Phragmites kind of have died off a bit, and they have this tan, beigey color. But I don't know if we can see too well in the color of the camera, but there are some new sprouts of Phragmites coming up. So they have these tall, slender green leaves and stalks. And then they have beautiful, when they're in bloom, they have these beautiful kind of reddish panicles on top. And the panicles contain flowers and seeds, but the seeds of this plant are not very viable. So the main way that the Phragmites spreads is through a rhizome structure, so a root-like structure, and you can see just how thick of a mat it's created along the ground. So the rhizome structure is underground, and it can spread at a rate of about 30 feet per year, so very, very quickly. And then it also spreads by stolons, which are similar to rhizomes, but they run right along the top of the ground. And stolons can grow, they're like little clones kind of the plant, and they can grow as far as 45 feet from the parent plant. And that's what creates these really thick mats along the ground. So because of that, it makes it very, very difficult for the other plants to grow. You can see we do have some existing plants within. You can see like this one right here. We do have a couple plants within the Phragmites stands, but it mainly creates kind of a dense monoculture. And monocultures are bad because they lack biodiversity. And biodiversity is what supports a healthy ecosystem, because each animal and each plant has a special role in an ecosystem that's important to another, right? Everything is linked. But when it creates this monoculture, it makes it difficult for other plants to grow, and then many animals to use this spot as its home. So Phragmites is really important that we don't allow stands of Phragmites to become established. Prevention is the best way of kind of stopping this plant, because it is really difficult to remove once it's become established. And because it's located in wetland habitats, these habitats are difficult to control these invasives, because you can't introduce chemicals into a wetland habitat. So controlling the growth of these plants can be difficult, especially because they grow in underground rhizomes too. So pulling them is really difficult too. You might pull the above ground structure, but you leave a lot beneath the ground, right?
All right, so we've made it all the way out to Quantic Creek, and our freshwater ponds lead out to Quantic Creek. And it's really amazing. It's actually high tide right now, so you can't see a ton of stuff down in the water or down on the shoreline, but Quantic actually came from the Indian name or the Native American name Quaquan, meaning trembling marsh. And if we listen maybe for a little bit, you might see why it's called trembling marsh. Because all the reeds, when they kind of knock together, hopefully you can hear it, makes a beautiful sound. And the other word in Quanquanatuk, the word tuk or atuk, means between two streams. So it is a really beautiful place here at the terminal platform looking over Quantic Creek.
So this is the original site of the Quag Ice Company. So looking down this direction of the path is actually, if you were to walk down this path or kayak down this path, yes, you can kayak here. There is a launch point over this direction. Very good. But if you were to go all the way down that direction, you would hit the overpass of Montauk Highway. And the Quag Ice Company originally had their production along this way, their ice production along this area of the refuge. And it was dammed at that overpass. It was actually a major engineering feat of its time to create that damming situation over there. But they did change a lot of regulations, and they had to remove the dam, so there was saltwater intrusion all throughout this area. So it didn't make a suitable place for ice harvesting. And if you are interested in this story a little bit more, we are going to be doing another nature news next week on the refuge history. So definitely stay tuned for that. That's a little spoiler alert.
So even though there was, a little barn swallow came through. So even though there was saltwater intrusion, it did, a lot of plants like swamp maples and tupelos, they can't withstand a lot of salt water. So that's why at low tide or even right now you might be seeing that there are a lot of snags or dead trees along the stream. So it looks really different than it did in the early 19th century when it got its name Fairy Dell. But now, even though there are these snags and dead trees along the creek and along the sides of the creek, it still is really important habitat for birds, for wildlife, small mammals that can use these dead trees. So even animals that are in the creek, like crabs and fish, can hide under those stumps in this tidal wetland. So that's really important too.
So the water, I see we have a question on it. Is the water, how deep is the water? The water level fluctuates really very greatly over in this area because of the tides. So if you were to kayak from our launch point over that direction, you definitely have to plan your kayak based on the tides for that time of year and that day. So because sometimes, kind of like Cara was saying, you can see it's very muddy. Sometimes this is super low and there's barely any water to kayak through this area. So you definitely have to time it right.
And just another point about kayaking at the refuge, this is the only spot that we would allow kayaks in. On our old ice pond and the freshwater ponds, we don't allow private kayaks there. So this is one spot that you can launch your boat from. But it is really beautiful, and some wildlife that you can see from the platforms here are herons. We've seen a lot of great blue herons and snowy egrets and great egrets. Of course, osprey. We have seen also red-winged blackbirds and different warblers come through here. So it's a great place to look for birds and wildlife.
And we have when we open back up on our walk, we have a lot of this information on these beautiful signs that Cara designed. So we have lots of information you can gather as you walk as well. So that's a nice way to kind of learn and explore at the same time. Do we have any questions from any of our listeners? While we're waiting for questions, we can kind of just take it in maybe for a moment. We can listen, because I don't know if you guys can hear well over the camera, but there's lots of red-winged blackbirds calling right now. You can hear the wind through all of these reeds.
And maybe as a quick recap too, we just want to remind folks that even though the Fairy Dell Boardwalk is closed right now because it would be hard to stay far apart from other visitors, we hope you enjoyed this virtual walk here, and we will let everyone know as soon as possible when it is back open to the public.
You can hear the wind. Awesome. Oh, and I see you'd like to go on group kayaks. Is there an email? You can email the Refuge. If you're interested in kind of scheduling a private program for a guided kayak, you can email the Refuge at programs@quagwildliferefuge.org, and we can type that in for you later too when we kind of close up on this live, so you have it right there in front of you. This is Fairy Dell Path right here, so it's across the way of the right over the railroad tracks. So this part of the Refuge, for those just tuning in, is closed right now because it is a narrow path, difficult to social distance on this path. But hopefully soon we'll be open back up. But our other refuge trails are still open to the public. All right, everybody, we really hope you enjoyed our walk today. If you have any other questions, we always kind of tune in and look back at these comments. So if you have questions, always feel free to ask or give us a call. There are fish in this water. Yes, good question. There's lots of wildlife in here. We have lots of, some sections of this pond are kind of brackish as you go over the way. This is all salt water here. Oh, there's an osprey. And this goes all the way through this to Quantic Bay. So all of that wildlife. Oh, he landed in the tree. Let me see if I can zoom in for you guys. There we go. Little shaky when I zoom in. Sorry about that. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. We hope you have a very wonderful day. Get out and enjoy the sunshine a little bit. And we'll see you next week for our next nature news.